Welcome, everybody. Can we have approval of the minutes for December 14th, 2017?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moving on, old business. Dave Spitz, an update on the Brooks Academy.
The public comment.
I'm going to go to him first, and then I'll go to public comment.
Hi. I'm going to be quick. You got a long agenda. I told you last time I needed a little more time to understand what we were asking for. Well, now I understand it completely. So. And I also have 3/5 of our committee, plus the museum director and the Historic Society. So we're well represented. So again, you have to approve us. Everyone else will say the same thing. Having said all that, what you've got in front of you from me is 6 pages from a 20-plus page application from 2013, because we're really asking for the exact same thing. We're just going to tell you now we figured out how to go about it. I've gone through the building. I've met with the committee. I have a cover letter requesting that Chris Clark and Sean Libby come take a look at it. We did that in December, and this is what we're planning to look at. Specifically, from the first page that you've got there, creating storage space in the attic and or basement. You've got a floor plan that shows the basement. We've gone through that. The old high school bathrooms are sort of neat, but they'd do much better as storage space, so it'd simply be a matter of getting down there, ripping a few things out, and creating a basement storage area. To use that well, it needs a lift or an elevator, which would also provide handicap access to the second floor. The second floor plan that you have in front of you shows 3 rooms, one of which is not used for exhibits because it's entirely used for storage. It would be nice to go back to the previous floor plan and use it for its original intention, which was an exhibit. But I'm not going to foist that on Janet Cassidy quite this quickly. I'm just going to say we're going to do the study and then figure out where everything can be stored and then go about it. There's ample need for the $30,000 that you approved 3 years ago. We hope that you will continue to do so. As I put in this cover page, the secondary thing I'm asking you for is to keep around the remaining funding for a while. I mean, you'll see in our application we asked for $30,000 plus $360,000 of construction. We didn't get the $360 construction, but we already have a whole bunch from before, so leave it around for a year. Let us do the study. We're probably going to ask for more money next year anyway. So we got to keep the money for the study, the $30,000. We'd like you to take your time for 1 more year before you take away the rest of the money. The only other interesting note I'll make, and then I'm going to stop, is on page 4 of the application, you'll see the previous CPC articles going back to '06. This committee has given a lot of money to the museum. The museum has used it well, and we'd like to continue to do so. I'll answer any questions if you have any.
Okay. Starting with Cindy?
No questions.
Mary?
None for me at this point.
Dan?
None for me.
Kathy? Jim?
Yeah, and this may be a question for you, David. My recollection is a little bit cloudy with regard to how much has already been approved for this entity. Is it just the 30,000 or?
There is an addition.
There's 3 articles that are outstanding.
Okay, and so it's the 30,000 plus the 360,000?
No,
No.
360 was never, that's just
Okay.
a
That
phase
was something
2.
else.
Okay, so how much is outstanding?
30,000 is what we are saying we need to have. You also have approximately 55,000 from the '09 article for exterior, and I don't remember the number because I've never been able to get the application for the '08. Kathy, you might have it, but I am not totally sure as to what the current number is on the '08. It's probably about 50,000.
Okay, but now my question would be for David. So, David, when do you expect to complete the study with the 30,000?
I've gone ahead, assuming that we're going to get a go-ahead. I've met with the town engineer. We can get an RFP out pretty soon. I expect to be able to get the study done within approximately 6 months.
6 months. Now, the other
Let me just follow up. I
Okay.
want to get it done before your next funding cycle in case we have to come back.
Okay. But there's additional funding that is sitting out there.
That's right.
Do you have any concept as to when you would be spending that additional funding and what for?
Well, I'll be optimistic. We get the study done in 2018. We start construction in 2019.
Okay, thank you, David.
Kathy?
Well, there's about 26,000 from the 2007 article, and there's about 53,000 left in the 2008 article, and then there's the 30,000 from the study.
Okay, so then there's approximately 79,000 in addition to the 30,000.
Right. But,
Okay,
I mean, the 30,000 can only be used for the study.
right. Okay, thank you.
Joe? No questions. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll have public comment. Any of you folks would like to comment on any of the projects that are in front of us to debate tonight? This is your opportunity to do it, because once public comment closes, this is for the board discussion, and where the board wants to go from there. So, would anybody like to have at it at the mic?
Rush it.
Hi, Heinz Prof, Natural Resources Director. The project that's in front of you, which has been in front of you before, is at Hinckley's Pond alum treatment, as well as the public access improvement. There's nothing earth-shattering that I want to present or add. It's other than I spoke to the company that did the original study back in 2009 and asked how alum treatments have progressed on Cape Cod, their success on several ponds. And I got a couple pieces of good news. One is that they are very successful in other towns other than the one we spoke about last time. The cost ranges between $3,000 and $4,500 per acre, which still fits within the original scope of their plan. There are more than one company now that kind of provides that service. One of them actually comes from Nebraska. The timing of the event of the treatment isn't critical. Just at some point, it takes about 10 to 14 days to do that. The public access portion of it, whether, the diagram and all the schedule of that, if all that money isn't spent, obviously it would be returned back to the CPC. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Carol?
Thank you, Carolyn Carey, the Community Center Director. I did present to you this evening some more facts that you had requested. I would first like to start by saying thank you for not approving last year, because I sincerely mean that. I learned a great deal, and I'm so grateful to the committee from learning about Technical Bulletin number 1. Copies for everyone. It's my new favorite read. But in that, I learned a lot about what we need to do and what we should do, and the minimal standards and where we should be looking. One of the most interesting things is I provided you with a quote that is higher than the original ask, but that quote would cover everything we need to cover for the state of Massachusetts. Interesting side note, everyone else is rated for a 4-hour burn time. The state of Massachusetts and only one other state is 6 hours. So this is one of the only companies that can actually provide us with that. I just wanted to say that I thank you for letting me resubmit and give you more information, because it was very beneficial, and I think it will help all of us and really be important for the papers and the documents that we're trying to preserve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask Carolyn? a
You
question?
can't.
Okay,
No, this is public comment.
okay.
Hi, Eric Beebe, Recreation Department. I'll be very quick. The one question that came up during the presentation of our Brooks Park lighting project was public meetings. Just wanted to inform the committee that we did have a public meeting on December 12th with the Recreation and Youth Commission. We didn't have anybody with any concerns, suggestions, complaints, so we took care of that, and that's it.
Thank you.
you.
Oh, now they're rushing to this.
I'll be quick. Obviously, a lot shorter than Eric. Robin Kelly, Cemetery Administrator. You guys requested that I go out and get an actual bid because I only had estimates for mine. And I did, and I submitted to the board, which I know you guys all have copies. So the original request was $47,000, which was an estimate, but an actual bid now, it's $49,900. So I hope you guys all have that in your packet. And he was very detailed in all the information in the packet. And at the end, he is going to make a report for the committee with all the documentation of the before and after photos of every single monument that he has repaired or fixed and conserved, and give the report back to you guys for closing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Julie Kavanaugh, Board of Selectmen. Just here to reiterate that I hope that you will support the Harwich Affordable Housing Trust Fund. As you all know, housing is such a critical issue here on the Cape, and we've been dealing with it very, very difficultly in Harwich. We haven't made a lot of progress, and this trust would help us move forward. We've all attended various aspects of housing training and zoning and all that kind of stuff, but we can't do anything without creating this trust. So I hope that you'll support it and support the Board of Selectmen in wishing to move forward. Also, the preservation of the Eldridge Conservation Lands. This is a critical piece of property for the town, the citizens, and I hope that you'll support us in that endeavor as well as to support the Hinckley's Pond restoration, as we discussed earlier tonight. All of these items are extremely important to the taxpayers, and the board is behind all of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Howell.
Good evening. Don Howell, Board of Selectmen. I feel a little bit awkward just picking out a few because it's kind of like picking out which children you like the best. But having said that, in two different areas. In the housing area, I agree with Julie. I've been a longtime advocate of affordable housing. It's a construct that will allow us to move forward in a kind of structured way to be able to produce more affordable housing in the future. In the housing in general, I'd like to make one general comment. As you ponder what you're going to be doing with that area, try to think about maximizing how many people are affected and how many people are going to be helped in which request, because that's really a guiding light for me. In terms of Judah Eldridge, it's not only a magnificent property, but I got to point out to you, we came this close for that to go out to a tax title. And if you would have to have come from the Cabbage Patch to think if it got sold at a tax title, that eventually that somebody wouldn't go into tax court, find a fractional interest of it that would be tangible, and do something with it. It's a highly desirable property to develop. It really is a piece of a whole cloth in that area. We've already done great work through the years of acquiring property for preservation, and that particular property abuts Hawks Nest. It'd be just a beautiful piece to add to the town. If it goes out on tax title, you will never see it again. Thank you.
Would anybody else wish to speak? Okay, moving on. Under new business, committee discussion and possible vote on the 16 applications and submissions. So, well, how do you want to approach it? What's the board's pleasure?
Well,
Everybody jump at one time.
seeing nobody else will say something, I'll start off the discussion. I mean, I think one of our tasks here is to take a look at all of these applications and get a sense from the committee as to how favorable they are and whether or not the ones that are favorable, when the total dollar amount is totaled up, we have enough funds.
Right.
So I don't know exactly how we get at that without sort of going through any type of formal straw vote, because I think we had some discussion at the last meeting, and I think the consensus was that a formal straw vote was not probably the best way of going at it. But my thought would be that we could go sort of application by application and just briefly get a sense of the committee as to how favorable that application is to all members of the committee, and we can just go one by one, because some may be totally favorable, some may be totally unfavorable, and some there may be some room for discussion, or maybe partially favorable or partially not favorable. And then I think in doing that, and not to put more work on you, David, but I think we need you to sort of keep track of if all the favorable ones, were voted on, does that put us over the amount of money that we have available? And if so, then we've got to take a look at how far over we are and where there may be some sort of marginal applications that we could cut back on. So that's my thought.
Should part of that consultation discussion include a discussion of whether the board or the committee feels that the project is eligible for CPA funding?
Definitely. I think
Because
that's,
that would,
I think that's.
that would be the first cut.
That's the first cut, because if it's not eligible, or any member feels that it's not eligible, then they should vote against it.
Okay, well,
agree.
Mary?
I'm in agreement with Jim. I think if we start by going application by application and get a sense, I still have some questions on a few. And a few I'm all for as long as there's money. And if there's not money, if there's not enough, then that's where I'll have to start thinking twice.
Cindy?
Absolutely in agreement.
Kathy?
Yeah.
Joe?
Sure.
All right, do we want to establish this in the blocks that we had the presentation? I had this set up on the agenda as the units were presented to us so that we could follow some kind of a system. So, I'm going to start with the preservation and digitalization of the Harwich Oracle newspaper, and that's H2. Questions and comments?
Excuse me, David, do you want to go around the
We'll
committee?
go right around. Yep.
Yeah,
And I'm going to do it intermittently. I don't want to start in one
Yeah,
area.
no, okay.
Okay? All right, Mary?
One of the projects on the Historic Commission, as you know, I'm the chairperson of the Historic Commission, came before us. I'm certainly in favor of it. This is one, if there's money, then I would certainly be in support of it.
Cindy?
Agreed. I would support it.
Dan?
I think it's eligible, and I would support it.
Okay, all right, thank you. Kathy?
I don't know. In light of some additional documentation I just got, so I'm still thinking about it.
Jim?
I would be in support of it.
Joe?
To me, it depends. It's not in my top three. It's something that I see value in. I'm not ready. I wouldn't reject it out of hand, but this is one of those that would be on the edge, depending upon overall funding.
Okay. And I pretty much feel the same way. So, moving, we got that? All right, moving on. H3, historic preservation of Brooks-Free Library exterior. We'll start with Joe this time.
Is it eligible? Because if it is, I support it.
Any comments to that?
Well, my comment would be that it is preservation. It will add 100 years to the useful life of the library, according to the engineer that came and presented before us. And if the monies add to the useful life of an asset, in this case Brooks Library, then it's eligible.
Thank you. Yes.
Jim?
Okay, I have a question on this one, David. Were they going to be submitting us a more detailed budget on the costs?
Did.
That's my,
I thought that was provided.
was it provided, then maybe I overlooked seeing it.
Like this, maybe something like that.
On this one?
Those are the
Um,
bids, those are the bids,
Yeah, those are the bid
yeah.
items. I didn't see any detailed budget, and let me just discuss one of my concerns, David. We had discussed this a year ago. They got a grant of community preservation funds a year ago. There seems to be a lot of confusion about the cost. There seems to be, the estimates they're getting do not seem to be accurate. When they went out to bid last year, the bids came in way over. In their presentation to us, they didn't seem convinced that by the addition of this additional money, it would give them sufficient money in order to finish the job. My general sense is that while, it's a valid project, it needs to be done, and I don't question that this is the wrong source of funding for them. They need a source of funding that's a little bit more flexible than this source of funding. And I do have some questions about the eligibility, but that aside, I think they need a more flexible source of funding than this. And I am hesitant to vote to approve additional funding for this project, seeing, that they aren't presenting us with a picture of what they expect the total cost to be.
Okay. Kathy?
I don't want to say I don't know. I'm on the fence.
Okay, no,
Listen to
that's
some-
fine.
I'm going to listen to some other
That's
comments.
fine. Cindy?
I'd like to hear more discussion as well, because I'm in agreement with Jim, there's a little bit of unknown. I don't know if it's the incorrect funding source, but is what we have in front of us enough? Clear enough?
Mary?
So, I do think it is a project that is CPA eligible, although I'm happy to see all the details if other people have information to the contrary. I do also agree that if we're told by an engineer that it is, a qualified engineer, that it is a 100-year project, I think that is the type of project that is adding to the useful life that can come through CPA funds. That being said, I'm happy to listen to others if there aren't. I'd love to see a way for the library to finally get done. That being said, it has come before the Historic Commission before. It will have to come before the Historic Commission, I suspect, again, because it is not only a historic building, it's in the historic district. So this one application didn't come to us before submission like some of the other ones did. I know they had in the past for their prior applications, but I do think it's qualified. I do think the money will get done. I hear some of the other concerns as well. If I know the funding has been, the bids came in exceedingly high. But it seems to me that if a building on the National Historic Register and a 100-year project isn't eligible for historic funds, then I don't know what could be. So, my 2 cents, or 2.5.
Dan, anything else?
Well, there again, I'm supportive of it, and I'm looking at the act right now, and it defines capital improvement as reconstruction or alteration of real property that materially adds to the value of the real property or appreciably prolongs the useful life of the real property. So, in my view, it's eligible, and I think we should support it.
And from a different point of view, after following the library's adventure through the past few years and try to get this project completed. I'm in favor of the project. I think there were a lot of errors in the past that weren't necessarily on the trustees of the library. And after saying that, I simply see it as Mary described it. It's a national registered building, and I'm supporting the process. Next, Cornelius Pond Woodlands Project. Kathy?
Oh. Well, I have to be in support of it. I think it's a great partnership with HCT, worth the, minimum investment, $200,000.
Jim?
Yeah, I'm 100% in support of this application.
Joe?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
Mary?
I haven't ruled it out. For me, it's total money.
Dan?
Yeah, I'm supportive of it.
And I am as well. Next, H6, Mount Pleasant Cemetery Gravestone Conservation. Jim?
I'm in support of it.
Dan?
I'm supportive.
Mary?
The Historic Commission supported it, but I do note the change in cost, so I'd have to double check the numbers. If there's still sufficient funding, then yes, I'm supportive of the project in general.
Joe?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
Kathy?
I'm in support of the project, but it's not as a high a priority for me in terms of the funding, because I think that the stones will still be there next year. So if it, can push came to shove, I would put it at a lower priority, that's all. I think it's a great project.
And I'm going to hold.
Great.
Yeah. I want to see how the funding mechanism works.
Mr. Chair, may I just,
Go
may
ahead,
I clarify? I thought this discussion was, I thought we were going to discuss and kind of get a sense of support, and then you're tasked with looking at the funding, and then we would have to pick and choose. Am I correct on that?
Well, when I set it up in the agenda, I said discussion and possible vote. So the board chose to
Vote?
do
Okay.
what they're doing, so.
Okay.
Yeah, but
What, no,
to speak to Cindy's point, my proposal was exactly what Cindy said, that we would discuss the merits of the project and whether we were supportive, and that.
That's the way it's being recorded.
Right, okay,
Right.
but a lot of the discussion of the board is if there's enough money. And that wasn't my intent with regard to what I was proposing that we do. I'm not objecting to it, but that wasn't the intent.
Okay, I understood. Anybody else
I
to
just,
that particular?
Nope. It's fine.
Okay. R14, Brooks Park Improvement Phase 5 Lighting. Dan?
This one gave me slight pause. I'd like to hear some more discussion.
Mary?
I'm supportive in general. I do think this is also in the historic district, though, so it's my only other question with it. It would, again, have to come back before Historic Commission for a certificate of appropriateness and everything, so.
I thought they went before.
I don't believe that one did.
Okay, we can look that up.
Seeing it. I have to double check, but I don't recall it.
All right. Cindy?
I was going to say, to speak to Mary's point, I don't recall this committee asking in the past for any of the Brooks Park various phases to go in front of the historic. I wonder if we were remiss in not.
Well, they generally have been coming.
They haven't? Okay.
Yep. They have been coming.
David, may I comment on that?
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason that they don't go prior is not, they're not requesting historic restoration funds. Now, the reason it has to go in front of your committee, Mary, is because it happens to be within a district that requires approval
Right.
before they actually do construction.
You're correct.
Okay, that
Point
answers
taken,
that.
thanks.
Go ahead, I'm
Yep.
sorry.
No, I said point taken.
Okay. Kathy?
Oh, I support this project.
Jim?
I support the project.
Joe?
Editorial comment. We as a town have gotten it too far to walk away now. I support the project.
And I am the rec liaison to the board, so I am in support of the project. Okay. CH7, Cape Housing Institute. Kathy?
I'm in support of that particular request for $10,000. I thought it was a great presentation. It's it seemed that the small investment really paid off in terms of educating a lot of people that worked for the town in that particular area. So I'd be in support of that.
Jim?
I'm in support of the project.
Joe?
Yes.
Dan?
I'm supportive of the project.
Mary?
I am as well.
Cindy?
I'm in support. I don't know if it's appropriate now. I will have to recuse myself from a formal vote.
Okay. I wasn't in support of this project, but you've just changed my mind. I'm looking at it from a point of view that that's fine that it's a taxpayer project, and I didn't think it reached out to enough people other than the members of the town. But you've changed my point of view.
Well, I think that the town personnel that attended the first part of the institute will be able to disseminate that information to many, many more people.
That's what I... Okay. C8, the buy-down program. The next three, C8, C9, and C10, if the board has no objection, I'd like to speak to all three, and I'd like to start. I know it's a little unusual. So, does the board have any objection to that?
No, you're the chair. Nope.
I've looked at this, I've done a lot of research on it, and I'm still not convinced on the trust fund that wants to be established and how it's going to be established. When I look at these three articles, I'm looking at individual articles that should be one article. It should be under one unit coming before the CPC, asking for funding. I don't understand why there's three individual units here. The applicants certainly had enough time to get together and do their due diligence to put one article together. That didn't happen. Saying that, I'm absolutely in support of Habitat of Humanity. There's no question about that. In my mind, that should be supported by this board. And again, this is only my opinion. As far as the Housing Trust, it seems to be the best vehicle to get all these entities together to go forward. And that's all I have to say about that. So, how do you want to break it down individually? Okay, we'll start with the buy-down program. Kathy?
Although I do understand that it is a one method of attacking some of the affordable housing problems, I don't think that it serves enough individuals. And for the amount of money and in a any given year where funds are competing for each other. I just don't feel like I could support this.
Jim?
I'm sort of on the fence on this one. I understand what Kathy just said, and I am sympathetic to Kathy's point of view. However, I do feel that this is one of a whole number of different mechanisms that can be used in order to, create more affordable housing in the town of Harwich. Now, David, I also agree with your position that there needs to be some combination of all these efforts. And I see the effort for the housing, for the trust, being the entity that does sort of coordinate that, but it doesn't exist at this time. So as far as this application goes, at this point, I would be in favor of it.
Joe?
Mr. Chairman, if I could take your lead for a moment and look at the three together, if that's all right.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, it's very difficult being acutely aware of the needs here on Cape Cod for housing, and it's not that none of the, that any one of these is not worthy. I have a structural defect, so to speak, a hang-up, as it were, when it comes to the Affordable Housing Trust. As I've said before, that it's not that it's not worthy, but there are several significant steps that need to occur before that truly exists. And to jeopardize perhaps that amount of money for that use concerns me. Of the three, I'm absolutely in support of the Habitat for Humanity without question. So for the remaining two, if I had, to me, I can't justify all three. And if I had to rank them, I would say Habitat, the buy down, and then the trust, maybe.
I'm in reverse order of that.
All right, so we've canceled each other out. That's fine. We're all
No,
set, Mr.
and I
Chairman.
understand what the dilemmas are. But again, I mean, I rail against the trust, but I understand that that should be the mechanism under all of this, if that was in place. So at some point in time, at some point in time, in my opinion, there needs to be a consolidation. Dan?
Well, I concur pretty much what you just said, David. I strongly believe that the Institute has to be established for this town to get some coordination with and provide some leadership with the creation of homes, places to live. So, and the other two applications, they do affect, well, they affect a very small population of people. So, it's not that I wouldn't support them, but I think, of all three, I think the Institute would have a greater impact.
Trust,
The
you mean.
trust, yeah.
Trust would have a greater impact on the community.
Mary?
So, I think the trust is the most important thing that needs to put in place. I recognize Joe and Jim's comments that it does not exist yet. However, if the administration is committed to getting all of their ducks in a row by May town meeting and can do that, then I would be willing to take the risk that town meeting, to put forth the application and put forth the money in a separate consecutive warrant article to give the town the opportunity to get the trust up and running. I'd hate to see it take another whole year. And that's what's gonna happen if it doesn't. If the administration can get the trust documents done, can get those articles drafted, then for me, the trust really is the top. I concur with Kathy on the buy down project. For me, that's affects a smaller number of people, and if the trust were already set up, I'd be voting for Habitat's. I'd be putting Habitat's money into a trust, and allow the people that are running the trustees running the trust to make those informed decisions rather than us. I like the buy down program. I think it's part of the whole, but that on this list of 1, 2, 3, that would be 3 for me.
I'm in support of all three. I, like Joe, a little concerned that the important pieces aren't in place yet, and it's concerning. But it is important, and again, to wait another year is problematic. What I like about the buy down is that it's not that it's quick, but it's available, and it does provide very palatable, affordable housing when it's home ownership to the town people, and there's very little pushback. So it's an easy, affordable unit to acquire, to add to our stock. But I'm in support of all three. So no more discussion.
Any other comments on the package of 3 here in front of us?
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Just point of order, because when we were sort of talking about this, there was the understanding that we were dealing with just the buy down. Now, 2 of the members asked you for permission to discuss all 3, such as you did, and you gave them that permission. But with regard to other members, we were just commenting on the buy down and not the other
I
items.
understand. I understand. And I actually led that by asking the board permission to,
Right, correct. And then
Okay.
Joe asked your permission to do the same
And I did,
thing, and that
and-
was fine. But other members of this board just dealt with the buy down in that round of discussion.
okay, so let's go to CH9,
Okay, which is, which one?
Habitat.
I'm in favor of that proposal.
Okay. Are there any other comments? Kathy?
I'm in favor of it also. I didn't
Okay.
weigh in on it.
All right, I'm sorry, I missed. My apologies. All right, C10,
Okay.
and that's the trust.
Okay, on the trust, I am completely in favor of establishing the housing trust. I noticed in this application, they're also talking about a part-time housing coordinator. I would like to see those 2 proposals separated, because I think the part-time housing coordinator is essential to sort of pull all this together as we were talking. So therefore, I would be 100% in favor of the full amount requested for the part-time housing coordinator. And I would wish the town a lot of luck to try to find somebody who would be willing to do that type of job part-time. So I'm in favor of that component. While I'm in favor of establishing the trust, I am concerned about our committing that amount of money to an entity which has not as yet been established. Now, I'm sort of on the border as to whether or not I would consider a smaller dollar amount to be committed to the trust should it be established than what was initially, requested. Now, I know in the request and in the discussion, there was discussion that from what was learned from the town of Yarmouth, that at least $400,000 was necessary for them to be able to do anything. Well, if this is approved by town meeting, this is going to be a new entity that's going to go through a whole startup procedure, and therefore I question whether or not they would even be in the position to, spend that amount of money should they be established within the next year. If they are established by town meeting, they certainly would be a prime candidate to come back to us in the next cycle of funding for the next year. So while I'm in favor of the trust, I'm not in favor of the total dollar amount that they were requesting.
The thing is, I mean, I understand all the questions we have about the establishment of the trust and the bylaw and whether it would be approved, et cetera. But if we don't fund it, then it could be another year and a half before any funds might be available for the trust to do anything with.
Go ahead,
May I
continue,
respond?
let her finish your thought.
Yeah, no, that's just what I meant. It'll be like
Yeah.
May of 2019?
19.
Yeah.
Well, may
Go
I
ahead, Jim.
respond to that? And I agree with Kathy on that. My concern here is that, and this goes to exactly the point which I said that we were not going to discuss.
Right.
And that is, they're talking about, I think it was approximately $400,000 to be set aside for the trust activity. Now, if we have that available, then I don't object to it. However, I would hate to see that money sit there for an organization that does not legally exist at this point in time. However, I probably could be convinced that a lesser amount may be appropriate.
The Board of Selectmen put a tremendous amount of capital into making their presentations to us. They came before us. The chairman made his statement. A leap of faith, and he's absolutely right. How they're gonna the onus is on them completely to get this done. We have the ability to rescind the money next year if they don't get this passed at town meeting. That ability does exist. Go ahead.
But it would be another year before we could rescind it and reallocate it.
That's absolutely right.
Whereas if there are projects that are on the current list that are not going to get funded because we're committing this
Total dollar.
400,000, this total dollar amount, then I don't think that's fair to the other, to the other applicants. And while I know the Board of Selectmen are 100% committed to it and will do everything to try to get this passed, and again, I'm in favor of establishing the housing trust. But we have all seen what can happen at town meeting if a local neighborhood group, or some other entity within town decides that they're going to fight any type of proposal. No matter how hard the selectmen work for it, it may not pass. And we won't know that until town meeting, and we won't know that until we start seeing whether any opposition occurs. I mean, take a look at the opposition to the habitat housing that occurred in West Harwich. Take a look at what the opposition to certain 40B projects which have been proposed, and the opposition was so great that the developer pulled out of the 40B and is now doing, a fair market value development. So I don't think we, I give the selectmen a lot of credit, and I hope that they are able to get it through, but I don't think we have any guarantees at this point.
Joe?
I support a housing trust for the town of Harwich, without question. I don't blanch at the dollar amount. I serve on this committee as the representative of the Historical Commission, but I serve this town as the chair of the Bylaw Charter Review Committee. This is a three-pronged process. I have no doubt that an article at annual town meeting to accept the applicable statute, I have no doubt that that will prevail. My concern is on the governance of said housing trust, and that requires at least a general bylaw of the town. There is nothing formally proposed that would come before the Bylaw Charter Committee as of today. But even if there were, there are myriad scenarios that could be offered. There's another municipality of which I'm strongly connected, which has a housing trust, but does not have the structure that Yarmouth has. And that means this town has its own options to build its own housing trust. We don't know how we want to build that. We don't know what the governance is of the housing trust. Yes, we can vote to accept the statute, and we have to begin that process. But the bylaw process, should it go through without any hitches whatsoever, is not going to be completed through the Attorney General's office until early to mid-fall, depending upon when all of that is submitted. It's not simply that town meeting vote in the spring to fund it and to approve the statute. It's that governance piece that is absolutely critical. And I'm passionate about it, as we all are. I don't mean to suggest otherwise. What I'm passionate about is that process. I don't want to take that amount of money and take it away from housing for the town of Harwich, or perhaps other projects that are worthy, if there's a procedural defect in the bylaw, if the town prefer not to go the bylaw route because of a different governance structure. These are all legitimate possibilities that we have no idea on. And we also don't have the beginning stages for the town to discuss that. I absolutely support housing. I absolutely support the housing trust and funding it. But I cannot in good conscience go forward on something that has no structure for governance whatsoever. And that is too big of a question to leave unanswered in January of 2018 for May of 2018. It's a major potential fault line. And so acceptance of the statute, in my opinion, will prevail handily. But if the bylaw doesn't, if the bylaw has a procedural defect, if a hearing notice for the bylaw has a procedural defect, and it is required to be denied by the Attorney General's office, then we don't have a housing trust. And we won't have one similar to the funding process for the same amount of time. We need the housing trust, but we need to build it before we can fill it. And we're putting a significant amount of money at risk.
Kathy?
Can we fund the housing trust's part-time coordinator position without having the trust established?
So not having statutes in front of me and not being an attorney and desperately looking for one. Oh, here he is.
Well, wait a minute, there's two at the,
There's two of
two
it
at the
there.
table.
So my answer is, can the town fund a part-time housing coordinator? Absolutely.
Yes,
And can there be a reference to a housing trust? Absolutely.
yes. And I would concur in that.
So legal and non-legal minds agree.
Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
Cindy?
I know the proposal was to, the intention, and I think the Board of Selectmen said this as well, is to mirror the town of Yarmouth and their housing trust, and how confident can we be that once that, can any of that change? That's I understand your concern, and I do too, of ultimately is who makes the decisions on what projects get funded. We talked about this at our last meeting. Is it really the folks on the trust, or will it be Board of Selectmen? And that's some concern there. But we do have, I don't know how much we can take it as a commitment that it will be mirrored as Yarmouth's bylaws and what have you. I don't know.
Parliamentarians.
I know, they're the worst. They absolutely are.
I just had one comment, if I may,
Mary.
Mr. Chair. My only comment back to Joe is, through you back to Joe, is that I understand your point, but I don't think the money's at risk. I think the money is tied up for an extra year, but the money doesn't, if the trust doesn't exist to spend the money doesn't get spent. So it stays in the account, and we can recover it next year. So that would be my only point of clarification.
Mr. Chairman, may I
Jim?
do a response to Mary's comment? I completely understand, and
Right.
you're 100% correct, Mary. But that would be a sum of money that could not be used for another project if indeed our totality of approvals goes over the amount available.
Agreed.
So therefore, we would then be taking money away from another project that we all agree should go ahead, where this money may not be spent for over a year.
I agree.
So since we're all looking into our crystal balls, what happens next year when the funding mechanism from the state is cut again, and we've spent on these projects $3 million, $3.1 million? That's the totality of what we have to spend. If the money's not there, what happens then? Moving on. H1, Arbor House. Building conditions, assessments, and evaluations. Cindy?
I don't have any questions.
Mary?
I'm in favor.
Dan?
I would support it.
Kathy?
I think it's a minimal amount.
Yeah.
I would support it.
Jim?
I would support it, but I would support it under the condition that was basically Charlene's response to a question that I had, and that is if Arboro House is not used by the town, if it's sold by the town, and not used for historic rehabilitation, that these funds would be then returned to the CPC. So with that sort of caveat, I do support the project.
Joe?
I support the project.
As I do. H4, preservation and archiving of public record storage at the community center. Dan?
The place is a mess, I would support it. No offense.
Not too much to the point. Mary?
I'm in support of the record storage.
Cindy?
I'm not. I think it's part of, I don't think it fits into CPC pockets. I think it's a, record storage is a part of any business entity and not fundable.
Joe?
How much time do we have? Because I need to, not a mea culpa,
Go as
But-
long as you keep us here.
but somebody on this committee put the community center director through the ringer. And she responded beautifully, and I completely support the project, as I've said before, but especially given the response back, what she's offered this evening is a proposal that is going to be, if it were ever audited by the state through the Supervisor of Public Records and the Secretary of the Commonwealth, would pass with flying colors. It is the best possible way that a municipality can support its historic and governing documents, and I support that. And I thank you for your efforts.
Jim?
Okay, David, may I request a point of clarification before I make my comment? Based on the information that we were presented with tonight, I am assuming that the request has been raised to the $90,275.40.
I would have,
Okay. With that clarification, and especially with Joe's comment, I am fully in support of the project.
Kathy?
I'm a little concerned that, if Joe hadn't happened to be at the meeting when this was presented, we wouldn't have known about this, whatever it was, this
Technical
manual.
vote on number one, yeah.
And we would have perhaps gone on our merry way and built something that was entirely inappropriate. So, is this, can I ask the question of the person who gave the information?
This is
No?
discussion with the board.
Okay, I'm just, I want to I want to feel comfortable that, you know, this is going to encompass everything that needs to be done for record storage. I don't think I know enough about it to,
Is it acceptable to respond, Mr. Chair, or?
Go ahead.
All right.
Board discussion.
Sure. So what's been presented this evening, or what's been added this evening, and I'm not specific to the square footage as it gets to cubic feet and, you know, linear records and all that, but it is what the supervisor of public records and the secretary of the Commonwealth require if a town is going to create storage space. The beauty of the product that's being suggested, and I do not use it and have not used it, but is that it's modular in nature. In other words, you're gonna get more space to start out, but it's gonna allow you to expand for the permanent historic documents that would not otherwise be in the clerk's office, as well as all of the documents that need to be retained anywhere from 1 to 60 years. This accomplishes a significant need for the town, in my opinion, as far as record storage, and it does it in full compliance with the public records laws and bulletins.
okay.
Well, my comment is, as it stands now, I'm walking around with a huge tote full of documents, and apparently I'm gonna receive more. And if I have to put them in that deep dark dungeon downstairs, they're never gonna be seen again by any other chairman. So, I'm in favor of the project. H5, Records Management, Town Hall. Yeah,
I'm supportive of it.
Mary.
I am as well. I think it's the twin to
Yes.
the community center work. And that's the front end that needs to get done, so you can store them and find them if I understood the presentation correctly.
Not support, same reason.
Joe.
Supportive.
I support the project.
Kathy.
I think my only question is this whole idea of historic preservation and whether these records fall under historic, because some are and some aren't.
If I may.
Go ahead,
through you
Mary.
To actually, Joe is, I think, the one that convinced me of that at the last meeting. Because if I recall correctly, Joe, you stated that we needed to, that the record management system and the preservation is identifying them and knowing what can be destroyed and identifying what has to be retained.
Correct,
And then actually storing them. So,
Right, and then
so
knowing
this
where
is the
they're stored.
first half that is identifying, knowing what can get destroyed, what can't get destroyed, what has to be kept, and then providing the extra storage under the community center to store all those extra documents that just keep coming. So, and if you look in the clerk's office now, like, you can see what she's done with the current vital records and how they've stored them and sealed them, and they're airtight and you don't touch them on a daily basis, kind of thing. And that was my understanding for the historic stuff.
Joe.
If
You-
I may,
you have an
I
answer
think
to
it gets-
Kat?
Yeah, I think it gets to your question, that this process is what the town will use to be able to delineate, this is a historic record, this is a historic permanent record, this is a record that's required by law to be kept for X number of years, and within that would include documents that could become historical in nature, depending upon the topic. And so you can't answer the question unless you use a system like this.
Okay, that's a good answer.
So, thanks.
Are we all set? Okay, moving on. What would you like?
9.
You sure?
Mhm.
Okay, Rec 16, Pleasant Lake Ave crossing lights. Jim.
I'm not in favor of this project. I don't feel it's eligible for this source of funding.
Dan.
I'm supportive, as we have been supportive of the other crossings that we fund, or I should say the crossing lights, yeah, that we funded in the past. I think it's a matter of safety. I bike ride, and I get to that intersection, and you better stop and look both ways twice.
Kathy?
I'm in support of the project.
Mary?
I was in support of the project, but I would entertain any information Jim has as to why you don't feel it is.
Well, if we take a look at the wording of the statute, let me just get to this. Okay, funds can be used for the acquisition, creation, preservation, rehabilitation, and restoration of land for recreational use. As Dan had mentioned, this is a safety project, not a creation of land for recreational use. And that's why I don't feel it's eligible.
I'm in support.
Joe?
I support it.
I don't support the project, based on something totally different than what Jim just said. If they had offered a different manufacturer when they came before us and put the application in, I'd be in support of the project. But as it is right now, I travel Queen Anne quite a bit, I travel 39 quite a bit, and those lights are never in sync. And it's created some havoc. So, again, if there was a different manufacturer involved, I'd support the project. Kathy?
Yeah, wouldn't it have to go out to bid anyway, so there might be several manufacturers that,
They were never clear on that and when they made their presentation to us. Rec 6, well, that was 16. OS 12, preservation of Aldridge Conservation Lands. Cindy?
Can you skip me? I just want to review it again. I apologize.
That's okay. Joe?
Solid maybe.
Mary?
So, I still had questions on whether tax title versus eminent domain. I'm in support of the town getting the parcel. And it may be that tax title is not practical for the property. But I still had a couple of questions on that.
Jim?
Okay, I'm opposed to the project. And I feel that if the town is serious about acquiring the property for whatever use, that they would be better off at this point, exploring the tax title approach.
Dan?
I'm with Jim.
Kathy?
from the information that we got about the differences between eminent domain and tax title taking, and there were a couple other options, it seemed like the tax title taking, the only drawback was that it took a little bit longer, but it involved less money. And I don't think that this parcel is really going anywhere right now, so I would be in favor of us having some more investigation into the possibility of using those other options, tax title taking versus eminent domain.
Cindy? We're back
Thank you,
to
and I appreciate Kathy's comments. So I would agree with Kathy that perhaps it is we do want to wait.
And myself, I'm up in the air on this one.
Dave, can I
Jim,
just make
go ahead.
a comment before we proceed on to the next item? I would just like to thank Chris Clark and the administration for providing us with the information that we requested in such detail. It was extremely helpful.
Okay, moving on. Saquatucket Landside Pedestrian Accessibility, Rec 13. Joe?
Can you get back to me on that?
Cindy?
I'm in support.
Jim,
I'm in support.
Mary,
I'm in support.
Kathy,
I'm in support of the pedestrian accessibility proposal, yeah, definitely.
Dan.
Total support. It's
Yes.
I have questions about this project. Rec 15, Hinckley's Pond Restoration, public access to Route 124, in the area of Route 124. Dan,
Well, one time I questioned whether it was eligible for CPC funding, but some of the material that we've received regarding legal opinions, et cetera, indicates that it probably is eligible for CPC funding. I would like to reserve judgment for now.
Mary,
I'm in favor of it. I think I look at the presentation that we had was that this is a 15 to 20-year project, and to me, I equate that much like a 100-year project on the library. It's the once in a very long time. I don't think it's regular maintenance on it. So that, for those reasons, I'm in support of it. I think it's a necessary portion to the herring run.
Cindy,
I agree that it probably is CPC fundable. As in the past, concerned about legitimate public access. And if I recall in the presentation, and correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody's better memory, the question was asked, would the proposal to make it more accessible to the public with the bikes and the kiosk or the shelter would not, if CPC does not fund the entire project, they will not go ahead and create that more of a public access. Am I correct in that? No, they're going to go ahead and.
they're going ahead and
Regardless.
as I understood the
Thank you.
presentation.
Oh, then I would.
I could be,
I
ahead.
believe that what they said was that if we funded that part, they would move forward
Right.
with,
Yes,
That's-
but if we didn't fund it, they're not going to improve public access to Hinckley's Pond.
I believe that was what was implied.
yeah. Kathy. Cindy, I'm sorry, you have any?
Again, that's just my concern, the real public's ability to access the pond as in years past.
I'm not in support of it, and particularly because I don't believe it falls under the guidelines. With everything that I've read, and my interpretation, which is just mine, is that it does not fall under the guidelines for support.
Jim,
Okay, David, I have a question. Did we ever receive a more detailed budget on all components of this project? Did I
No.
ever? Because I specifically asked for a more detailed budget because in my view of the application, there was a $79,000 discrepancy
right,
between the total amount that was requested and the components that were shown in the application. And I think before we can truly consider this, we need to figure out why there is that $79,000 discrepancy in the dollar amounts. Now, that aside, I've read the legal opinions, I've also read some of the other information, and I do not feel that, in my opinion, the restoration of the pond itself is an eligible project under the Community Preservation Act funding. Now, I agree with the town that it is, a viable project and something that probably should be done, but I just don't feel that this is the source of funding or the correct source of funding for the pond itself. I do, however, feel that the access improvements, are an eligible project should we know what the total dollar amount is? Because when I totaled the access improvements, it came to like a total of about $20,000, yet in the presentation, it indicated that it was much higher than that. And the access improvements, to me, actually create an area which is much more accessible for recreational purposes. Therefore, in my mind, it would be really the creation of more recreational activity on the land adjacent to the pond.
Joe?
I didn't have a strong opinion one way or the other, but I am concerned based on what the colleagues closest to me have just suggested with regard to whether it's allowed or not. So I'm still on the fence in that regard.
Did you read the legal opinions?
I did. It didn't sway me.
They are opinions,
Yeah,
right?
it didn't sway me.
As far as I'm concerned, I keep going back to the Newton case. The town of Newton's pretty progressive in their thinking. And that progressiveness, they've been sued quite a few times, and they tend to come on the positive side of those suits. And they did something very similar to Hinckley's Pond. And when this was before us previous, I said the same thing. Take a look at the Newton case, see the way they structured it out. But the information is as we have it now. So my question to Jim would be, if there's a discrepancy in the amount of money that's involved, is there a possibility that we could still go forward with the project and delete that discrepancy? The amount of,
Well, I mean, I think.
as we may do with some of these other,
Well, David, it depends on whether or not we feel we need to come to closure on all these items tonight. Because
Right.
we had requested that information from the town back, I forget whether they came before us in November or December, and we haven't been provided with that information.
Right.
So I think, in my mind, before we can act on this item, we need to go back to the town and get that additional information.
all right, so being mean-spirited, could we go forward without that information? It's not here in front of us. You wouldn't be in a positive,
I would
I understand.
then vote no on both components of it.
Okay. Is there anything else on this, on the Eldridge Conservation Lands?
No, we're on the Hinckley's Pond.
I'm sorry, Hinckley's, yeah, there we go.
David,
Dan?
I would just like to make a general comment. And I've had this opinion ever since I started serving on the board. And that is that the Commonwealth has never issued any regulations regarding its interpretation of the provisions of the Act. I'm not sure why, but possibly they're letting communities decide just exactly how they apply the provisions of the Act to their community. Joe, any? No.
Wasn't there a piece of information that we were given that other communities do other things with CPA funding, and we have the ability to decide ourselves? We don't have to go on a prerequisite of what other communities have done?
David, yes, I remember reading something like that, and I forget exactly which document it was in, but each community needs to make its own determination on the interpretation of the act and how they want to apply it to their specific local conditions. Now, I haven't read the Newton case that you referred to, and I'd be happy to do that. But my theory, just knowing the town of Newton, was that there may have been much more recreational access to that body of water than there is currently to Hinckley's Pond. But that's just a guess.
Right, I can't answer that question.
You know, and personally, and in some of the discussions we had on this application a year ago, there was some question, you know, as to whether or not there had been thought of expanding the access creating, finding some land around there where more vehicular parking, could be obtained, and therefore making it the pond more accessible from the land side to all of the residents of the town of Harwich. And the current application really doesn't do that. It really makes it accessible solely from the bike path with no vehicular parking, available at all.
Anybody else want to address that?
I personally wasn't as concerned with the parking lot aspect of it, just knowing the volume of bike traffic that goes by in the spring, summer, and fall. That wasn't a huge issue for me. I know for others it seemed to be, but.
Anybody else want to speak on the topic? Okay, we've completed this part of the process. How does the board want to handle it from here on out? What do we want to do?
May I make a suggestion,
Sure.
David? What I would suggest, and you may want to adjourn for a short period of time in order to do this, is take a look at the comments and sort of get a sense, or give us a sense as to whether or not you feel that if everybody voted in, based on the comments they made, whether or not the amount of applications that would be approved would be either under or over the amount of funds that are available.
Here's the problem I have with that. That's a significant amount of money, $650,000,
Correct.
if we're going to ask for more information. And I think that's what
That's what I'm requesting with
right,
regard
in
to
order for you to
Hinckley's
have
Pond.
that would be a significant,
Right. And the only way that we could handle that is potentially, if the committee was willing, to basically request that information of the town, adjourn this meeting, and schedule another meeting where we would then come back and go through the discussion that I just suggested, and at that point, we may then be ready to take a formal vote.
board members.
I completely concur with Jim.
Mary,
Yeah, I do as well.
I agree with
Cindy.
Jim. Thank you.
Joe, Kathy?
Okay.
Support, right?
And I'll make it unanimous. Okay, then we will do exactly that. Okay. Next up,
When will we next meet then? A week from
I
today?
gotta ask the secretary that question. When's our next meeting?
You all
Oh.
have to decide. I don't decide it at all.
Well,
Meet
when
a
are
week
we
beforehand.
scheduled?
February
We
8th.
have
February
February,
8th?
yeah. That
Yeah.
is inadequate for
No.
anything.
Right, this is the
Before that.
11th, next Thursday.
You need a week. If the town
No matter
says
where it's
o-
gonna be.
Yeah, if the town says that they'll forego that week on the website prior to the meeting, then you can have it next Thursday.
You would
State
ha-
says 2 days, town wants 1 week.
Well, the problem is it's a holiday on Monday, so you'd have to get it in first thing tomorrow morning, I think. Joe's doing the math with me as well,
Okay,
because Monday doesn't
Right.
count
Monday
for your
can't count.
48 hours.
But we would get it in tomorrow morning, it's still less than a week.
how does what is the board's pleasure?
David, I would suggest that we contact the town first thing tomorrow morning to see whether or not that would be feasible under the town regulation, and if so, have the meeting a week from tonight.
Okay, Joe,
I agree with them.
I agree.
Kathy? Dan?
Yes.
Cindy.
I wouldn't be available.
You would
No,
not.
would not, on the 18th. But the following week I would. I could make it work.
I'm gonna be out of town. But it's always gonna be somebody,
Yeah,
so. I
and
mean,
as long as there's a quorum.
Yeah,
There's quorum, yeah.
no,
Right.
true.
Okay,
But
then,
road is important.
Point of information,
all right,
point of information, you can't do it.
You-
See, you want that week.
The current policy on posting meetings for all committees in the town is that by noon on a Thursday, you have to do it for the subsequent week. So as of noon today, you lost next week.
All right, what about,
You know, it doesn't have to be a Thursday.
no, it doesn't, and that's what I'm thinking.
Here's a calendar, sweetie. So, for January, here we are.
Here we are.
So you can't have it on Friday?
Friday, the 19th?
I don't know where,
What is that? I'm not in
and
town.
the 19th is a Friday?
January 19th, and I'm not in town.
Not in town. I think
That's next week, though. We
same
can't do
day,
next week.
same day.
Has to
I
be the
can
week
have it.
That's the
after.
week-
Has to
okay,
be the
so-
week
Still a
after.
week.
What about like the
26th?
What day of the week is that, David?
It's on a,
It's a Thursday.
that's a Friday.
I'm sorry, Friday.
That's a Friday.
Wednesday of that week.
Yeah.
We can do it,
Tuesday or
24th,
Wednesday.
And what day of the week is that?
Wednesday.
on a Wednesday.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking is that planning board has a meeting Tuesday of that week, so I could do any night but Tuesday.
I could do Wednesday.
Yeah,
I can do Wednesday.
Yeah.
Joe,
Wait,
Dan,
he's looking.
okay. Cindy?
Yes.
Can I ask,
Sure, go ahead.
Wait, the 24th, correct.
do you recall when the zoning board of appeals meets?
No, I'm sorry, I don't, and I don't have
It's on
that
the calendar.
information with me,
If you
Dan.
go to the
Yeah.
town
Let
website,
me-
they should be.
Go ahead, no, no,
I can't
that-
recall
that's
when.
Are
fine.
you locked in to that? Are you on the town website?
No, I'm on, I'm not on the town website.
31st, that's right. Yes. Yep.
So,
Okay, so I can make it.
24th Wednesday?
Yep.
We all in agreement?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that'll be our next meeting,
So I will get what, we're doing Wednesday, the 24th.
24th, right,
Wednesday, the 24th.
right.
At
And I will
6
get
o'clock?
whatever room I
6
can
o'clock,
do.
same time, whatever room's available.
Whatever room, I will make it.
Is everybody in agreement with that? All right.
So someone needs to ask the town for the budget, and then,
You were gonna remind me of something.
is that all? You don't want to do anything else on that?
No, that's,
The short people,
okay. There's one thing we have left as a housekeeping thing, and this is the information I sent all you through email on the conflict of interest. Would you please pass it down and sign it and date it that you have looked at the information? That's all this is about.
not that you've done anything other than received the email with this conflict of interest thingy.
David, are we still on other?
Yeah,
while
we're still,
signing?
yeah, yep.
Okay, under other, I just had two comments with regard to the 2018 meeting schedule. And the comments were on the May 10th meeting and the October 11th meeting. Those are meeting nights that the planning board is also having meetings.
Okay,
So if we keep with those, both Mary and I will only be able to be at this meeting for a half an hour, because the planning board meeting starts at 6:30.
can we divide you up?
I could develop a split personality if you want. Some people say I already do have one. So I just wanted to make that
Okay,
comment
yep.
for the board to decide how they want to proceed.
Okay,
Okay. Well, May 10th is after town meeting. And
Yeah.
usually we can have,
And May 11th must be after Columbus.
October 11th.
October 11th must be after Columbus Day or something.
Probably.
We got time. Think about this.
I mean, when we had the issue last year, and we can wait until the meeting before that meeting to make the determination, we advanced the time of the meeting till
That's right.
5:30,
Yep.
so that, I could stay at least for an hour at the
Right.
meeting.
See what the agenda is. It's maybe nothing important.
Maybe should
Not that
I-
we don't always have something important to discuss.
Maybe
policies and procedures, girl.
Mm,
That's what's next. That'll be really fun.
That'll be really fun.
Thank you.
Well, is there anything else? Is there any other information that any of you may need other than what Jim just requested.
Were there any other questions that were outstanding? How about were you comfortable with the library budget, or was that okay? You had a
Well,
question about
I-
that.
I'm opposed to it, period. So
Yeah.
Oh,
if-
okay. I just wanted to know if there was,
No matter whether they submitted it or not, yeah. I'm
okay, I
opposed
just
to
wanted
it.
to make sure if there was any additional
No.
information we
Thank you,
needed
though,
for
Kathy.
everyone.
Thank you.
Different name. I can be different. Huh?
Just use the agenda.
Right.
I'll send you, we'll have all the same. Have a vote on the Marlboro House, Brooks Academy
Right.
Museum.
I want to discuss something to you, but I want to finish I want the signatures on while we're still in session, just so it's a legal representation of what we've done. For those who need it, like the parliamentarians.
I'm signing. It's all right, I've said like 3 of these by now.
That's all right.
There you go.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion
So
to
moved.
adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We have adjourned.